I'm Daniel Cole, 56. My son laughed at me in front of everyone. Now I own the Penthouse, the company, and my millionaire life. You want to know what rock bottom sounds like? It's not a crash. It's not a scream. It's laughter. 11 seconds of it, to be exact. I counted every single one while my own blood stood there and told me I didn't matter. My son said, "Stop acting like you own me. You don't get to tell me where I go or who I'm with." Everyone laughed. I smiled and said, "You're right. We're not together anymore. If you're watching this, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you changed everything." They laughed for 11 seconds. I counted each one. 11 seconds of my life dissolving in front of investors, colleagues, people whose respect I'd spent decades earning. 11 seconds of watching my own son treat me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience in his way. 11 seconds of realizing that the man I'd raised, the future I'd built, the legacy I thought I was creating, it was all a lie. But here's what they didn't know during those 11 seconds. Here's what my son didn't know when he decided to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered. I wasn't just standing there taking it. I was calculating. I was planning. I was remembering every single thing I'd built, every door I'd opened, every key I'd handed over to someone who never deserved them. The next morning, 5:30 a.m., I'm standing in my kitchen in my penthouse, the one I bought with my money, and I'm holding the coffee cup my son gave me for Father's Day 3 years ago. Black coffee, just like he knows I drink it. Just like I taught him to drink it when he was 16 and thought he was grown enough to join me for morning business calls. I poured that coffee, held that cup, and I couldn't take a single sip, because every time I looked at it, I heard those 11 seconds of laughter echoing in my head. You know what I did instead? I set it down and I made 3 phone calls. The locksmith's number was already dialed before the coffee finished brewing. My attorney's text was waiting in my drafts. The building concierge was on notice before the sun came up. Because when you've spent 30 years building an empire, you don't just react to disrespect. You systematically dismantle the illusion that anyone else controls what you've created. See, here's the thing. Nobody talks about when they're giving you advice about family and business. They tell you to separate them. They tell you to keep emotions out of decisions. They tell you blood is thicker than water. But what they don't tell you is what happens when your own blood becomes the poison threatening everything you've built. What they don't tell you is that sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone that actions have consequences, even when that someone is your own son. The deed to that penthouse? My name. Has been since day one. The company stock? My signature on every major decision. The investor relationships, the vendor contracts, the board seats that matter? All mine. But somehow, somewhere along the way, I let my son start acting like he owned it all. I let him tell people it was his place. I let him bring dates there and introduce himself as the heir apparent. I let him live a life funded by my work and claim it as his own achievement. That ends now. 3 days later, I'm standing in the atrium of our company building, the building I funded, the company I built, wearing the same navy blazer I wore to my son's college graduation. You remember that graduation? The one where I sat in the front row, chest swelling with pride, thinking about how this brilliant young man was going to take everything I'd built and make it even greater. The one where I whispered to my wife that all the late nights, all the missed dinners, all the sacrifices were worth it because we'd raised a son who understood excellence. That blazer felt different now, heavier, like it was carrying the weight of every mistake I'd made, every boundary I'd failed to set, every time I'd chosen enabling over educating. The investor mixer was in full swing. 200 people, half of them with the power to make or break our next funding round. My son was holding court near the bar, telling some story about a deal he'd closed last month, a deal I'd actually negotiated while he was on vacation in Monaco with friends whose trust funds were bigger than their work ethics. He was wearing a watch I'd bought him, a suit tailored with company money, and that smile that used to make me proud and now just made me sick. Then it happened again. Some investor made a comment about company direction, and my son, My own son looked right at me and said it again. "Stop acting like you own me. You don't get to tell me where I go or who I'm with." Different words, same disrespect, same dismissive tone, same assumption that he could humiliate me in public and I'd just stand there and take it. The crowd went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter started again. Nervous chuckles, sideways glances, phones coming out to record the drama. An influencer in the corner, some 20-something our marketing team had invited, was definitely getting this on video for her followers. CEO father and son family drama, probably. Rich people problems. Content for people who think our pain is entertainment. But this time, I didn't count the seconds. This time, I just looked at my son, really looked at him, and I saw a stranger. I saw someone who'd taken every opportunity I'd given him and twisted it into entitlement. Someone who'd confused privilege with power, inheritance with accomplishment. Someone who thought that sharing my DNA gave him the right to disrespect me in front of the people whose respect I'd spent my entire career earning. So I smiled. The same smile I'd learned in 30 years of negotiating with people who wanted to destroy me. The smile that meant the conversation was over and the real work was about to begin. And I said, "You're right. We're not together anymore." Then I walked out, not stormed out, not slammed doors or made a scene. I walked out with the same calm confidence I'd used to close billion-dollar deals, and I left my son standing there with his mouth open, finally understanding that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. The parking garage was empty, cold, echoing with the sound of my footsteps and the hum of expensive cars. This is where real business gets done, in spaces like this. Quiet spaces where you can think clearly and make the decisions that change everything. I sat in my car, the one I'd earned, not inherited, and I made those 3 calls. First call, my attorney. Not just any attorney, but the woman who'd helped me structure the company, protect the assets, set up the family trusts with ironclad governance provisions. "Jennifer," I said, "it's time to enforce the family trust governance clause. Schedule emergency filings for board protections. My son just violated the respect and competency requirements we built into the succession documents." She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Good attorneys understand that some conversations happen in parking garages for a reason. Second call, the locksmith. Not just any locksmith, but the security company that handles executive protection for half the Fortune 500. "I need new locks on the Penthouse. Smart deadbolts, restricted keys, full access control system, tonight." When you're protecting an empire, you don't use the guy from the yellow pages. Third call, Marcus, the building concierge, 20-year veteran, man who'd seen more family drama than a soap opera writer. "Marcus, prepare storage boxes and access logs for the Penthouse. Document every visitor, every entry, every guest my son has brought up there. I need everything." Marcus has worked with wealthy families long enough to understand what everything means. Guest logs, security footage, incident reports, noise complaints, all of it. While I was making those calls, I was drafting a message to our stakeholders. Not angry, not emotional, just facts. Timestamps, policy citations, documented violations of company governance. The kind of message that reminds people who actually runs things when someone forgets their place. You want to know something about power? Real power isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's methodical. It's having systems in place for when trust breaks down. It's having allies who've been watching and waiting for you to finally act on what they've been seeing for months. Like Margaret from the building. 73 years old, retired CFO, lives 2 floors down from the Penthouse. She'd been documenting noise complaints from my son's parties for 6 months. Late-night gatherings, unauthorized guests, people coming and going at all hours, treating the building like their personal club. Every incident logged, every conversation recorded, every policy violation documented, because Margaret understood something my son never learned. Respect for shared spaces matters. Like Tom from our IT department. Quiet guy, never causes trouble, but he sees everything that goes through our company systems. Private messages on company accounts, expense reports that didn't add up. unauthorized corporate card charges for client dinners that happened to coincide with my son's social calendar, screenshots, timestamps, digital trails that painted a picture of someone who thought rules didn't apply to him. Like David, my former CFO, now retired but still holding an advisory board seat. David had been asking careful questions about my son's expense patterns for months, professional concerns about accountability, governance, the kind of questions that board members ask when they're protecting shareholders from family drama. David had documentation, charts, patterns, evidence. I'd been so focused on protecting my son, on giving him opportunities, on hoping he'd grow into the man I thought he could become, that I'd ignored what everyone else could see clearly. He was destroying the reputation I'd spent decades building. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was upset, but because I was finally thinking clearly for the first time in years. At 1:58 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the penthouse, stumbling, unsteady, accompanied by laughter and voices I didn't recognize. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold, the sound of a key trying to fit in a lock that had already been changed. The handle rattled, once, twice, 3 times. Then silence, then pounding. Then my son's voice, slurred with alcohol and thick with entitlement. "What the hell? Why doesn't my key work? This is my place." I stood behind that door, my door, in my home, and I listened to my own son having a meltdown because for the first time in his adult life, something he expected to work didn't work. The pounding got louder, the language got worse. His friends started laughing, but it wasn't the confident laughter from the mixer. It was nervous, uncomfortable laughter. The kind people make when they realize they're watching someone lose control. Then Margaret's door opened. Sweet, 73-year-old Margaret, former CFO, woman who'd negotiated with oil executives and tech moguls and never once raised her voice. She stepped into the hallway in her robe and slippers, looked at my son and his drunk entourage, and said in the calmest voice imaginable, "Keys stop working when you no longer live here." My son went ballistic, screaming about his rights, his inheritance, how I couldn't do this to him. Threatening to call lawyers, to call the police, to call anyone who would listen to his tantrum. And Margaret just stood there, recording every second on her phone because she understood something my son didn't. Evidence matters more than emotion in a court of law. I stayed silent behind that door. My attorney had been clear. Document, don't engage. Let him prove exactly who he is when he thinks no one important is watching. Let him show his true character when the cameras are rolling and the consequences are real. The next morning at 6:45 a.m., the scheduled email I'd drafted landed in stakeholder inboxes across the company. Video of the public disrespect, documentation of policy violations, corporate card misuse patterns, governance concerns from board members. It wasn't an emotional rant from a hurt father. It was a professional briefing from a CEO protecting company assets from documented misconduct. By 9 a.m., HR had acknowledged the investigation. By 10 a.m., vendor partners had frozen my son's privileges pending review. By noon, investors were replying, "We back Daniel's leadership transition." You see, the thing about respect is that it's like credit. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy. My son had been spending my respect like it was his personal bank account, and when the bill came due, he didn't have the assets to cover it. That afternoon, I packed his belongings myself, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted to understand exactly what I'd been enabling. Box after box of things purchased with money he'd never earned. Watches, clothes, gadgets, trophies from achievements that were really my achievements. I labeled each box with surgical precision, company Amex trophies. Tuesday client dinners. Borrowed watches. Each label a reminder of how far we'd both strayed from reality. The phone kept ringing. Media requests wanting to know about the family drama. A buyout proposal from a rival company, sensing weakness and opportunity. Consulting requests from other family businesses asking how to rebuild culture after trust breakdown. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, but the story wasn't about drama. It was about accountability. 2 weeks later, we sat in a conference room for mediation. Not the big conference room where we held board meetings, but a smaller, more intimate space where my attorney laid out terms that would determine the rest of my son's life. The terms were simple, non-negotiable, and fair. Resignation from all company roles, signed NDA and non-disparagement agreement, return of all company property, forfeiture of equity held in family trust due to documented misconduct. In exchange, no criminal referral for corporate card fraud, and a repayment plan that wouldn't destroy his future if he honored it. My son sat across from me, seeing me clearly for maybe the first time in his adult life. Not as an ATM or a stepping stone or a target for public humiliation, but as the man who'd built everything he'd taken for granted. The pile of evidence on the table wasn't just documentation, it was a record of every opportunity he'd wasted, every boundary he'd crossed, every moment he'd chosen entitlement over earning respect. He signed, not because he wanted to, but because he finally understood that actions have consequences, even for people born into privilege, especially for people born into privilege. The investigators on standby made it clear that this was a business decision, not a family favor. The signatures were witnessed, notarized, final. Legal protection for the company, accountability for the misconduct, and a path forward that didn't involve enabling someone who'd proven he couldn't be trusted with responsibility. A month later, I'm standing on the Penthouse rooftop, hosting our new product launch party. The city skyline stretches out below us, lights twinkling like possibilities, and I'm surrounded by people who understand that respect is earned through work, not inherited through DNA. The team we've built, the culture we're creating, the future we're working toward, it's clean now. Clear. Based on merit instead of nepotism. Security blocked my son at the elevator when he tried to crash the party. He couldn't find a single resident willing to vouch for him, because respect isn't transferable. You can't borrow it from your father indefinitely. Eventually, you have to build your own credit. David, my former CFO, raised a toast that night to leaders who fund, build, and protect, and to locks that close on entitlement. The whole rooftop laughed, but it wasn't the cruel laughter from that mixer. It was the warm laughter of people who understand that boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. I've rebranded the company around ethics-first policies, receipts required for everything, mentorship programs for entry-level staff who understand that opportunity is a gift, not a right, background checks that look at character, not just credentials. We've launched The Key Room, a scholarship and training fund for underrepresented founders who've been locked out of opportunities because they didn't have the right connections or the right last name. The building community has shifted too. It's no longer his son's place, it's Daniel's home. A place where respect matters, where rules apply to everyone, where your father's accomplishments don't give you license to treat people like servants. 3 months after the mediation, we had a final court hearing to formalize the trust protections and leadership transition. Quick, professional, documented. The judge commended our governance structure, our documentation, our handling of what could have been a messy family drama. Outside the courthouse, my son tried one last guilt pitch. One last attempt to manipulate emotion instead of accepting responsibility. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I said, "I loved the man I hoped you'd become. I will only invest in reality." That was 6 months ago. The smart locks on the Penthouse hum quietly now, granting access to people who've earned it and keeping out people who think they're entitled to it. I've set custom access for team members who need it, disabled all legacy keys, created a system based on current value instead of past relationships. Last week, a young intern asked me, "How do you know it's time to change the locks on your life?" Smart kid reminds me of myself at that age, hungry, respectful, willing to work for what he wants instead of demanding what he thinks he deserves. I told him, "When respect stops knocking and entitlement starts kicking." The Penthouse is quiet now, peaceful, mine. The company is thriving under leadership that understands accountability. The future I'm building isn't based on hope or wishful thinking, it's based on documented performance and earned trust. Every morning I pour my coffee into a new cup. Not the Father's Day gift that carried the weight of disappointment, but a simple white mug that represents new beginnings. I drink every drop because it tastes like freedom. Freedom from enabling someone else's dysfunction. Freedom from sacrificing my reputation to protect someone who didn't respect it. Freedom from carrying the emotional weight of someone else's choices. The 11 seconds of laughter that started this journey. I still remember them. But now they sound different. Not like humiliation, but like liberation. Not like an ending, but like a beginning. The beginning of understanding that love isn't enabling, respect isn't inherited, and family isn't an excuse for accepting unacceptable behavior. I built an empire by understanding that every decision has consequences, every relationship has terms, and every door needs the right key. When someone proves they don't respect the keys you've given them, the loving thing, the only thing, is to change the locks. My son is building his own life now, working for someone else, learning that respect is earned daily, discovering what it feels like to succeed through effort instead of inheritance. It's harder than the life I gave him, but it's more honest. Maybe someday he'll thank me for teaching him that accountability isn't punishment. It's the foundation of genuine self-respect. The city lights twinkle below the penthouse windows every night, reminding me that there are millions of people out there working to build something meaningful. Some of them understand that success requires character. Some of them are still learning. Some of them need mentors who will teach them the difference between opportunity and entitlement. I'm one of those mentors now, not because I'm perfect, but because I learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone that your resources aren't infinite, your patience isn't unlimited, and your respect isn't unconditional. The smart locks hum. The coffee tastes perfect. The company grows stronger every quarter. The scholarship fund helps young entrepreneurs who understand that opportunity is a privilege to be earned, not a birthright to be claimed. And somewhere in this city, my son is learning what I should have taught him years ago, that the key to any worthwhile life is the willingness to earn it. If this hit home, like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. And remember, control the keys, because the moment you let someone else decide who deserves access to what you've built, you stop being the architect of your own life and become the victim of someone else's entitlement. The locks have been changed. The keys are mine. And for the first time in years, I sleep soundly in the home I built, surrounded by people who understand that respect isn't inherited, it's earned every single day through choices that honor the trust placed in you. That's my story. That's how 11 seconds of laughter became the foundation of a life built on accountability instead of enabling. That's how changing the locks changed everything. And if you're dealing with someone who thinks your love, your resources, or your respect are unconditional, if you're enabling someone who's learned to mistake your generosity for weakness, then maybe it's time for you to change the locks too. Because you deserve to be surrounded by people who knock respectfully, not people who kick down doors they never earned the right to walk through. Control the keys, change the locks, build the life you deserve. And remember, every morning is a chance to pour fresh coffee into a new cup, free from the weight of yesterday's disappointments and full of today's possibilities. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not punishment, but freedom. Freedom to build something better with people who understand that respect isn't optional, accountability isn't negotiable, and love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling. The locks have been changed. The empire stands stronger. The future is earned, not inherited, and that makes all the difference.